I think we all know what a big impact our parents have on our mental health.
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do.
But what about the generations before them? I'm Jen Tatro, and this is From Jen. I have been a bit addicted to Family Search recently, and it has me thinking about intergenerational trauma, but also intergenerational resilience. In today's video, I am going to talk about what recent research has discovered about intergenerational trauma. I'm going to share some discoveries I made about my own family. And finally, I'm going to get into how I'm finding solace and strength by looking beyond my parents and grandparents to ancestors that I've never met. There are three ways that I know of that trauma is transmitted from one generation to the next. And those are through the collective societal change of being born into a group that experienced widespread trauma. Also through learned responses from caregivers who experienced trauma. And finally through changes in the expressions of genes, also called epigenetic change. That is trauma written into our DNA. Although it's closely related to the two vectors of intergenerational traumas that I am going to talk about, I don't feel qualified today to delve into the kind of widespread damage caused by generational or multi-generational traumas like slavery, war, or oppression, or genocide. So I am mostly, and forgive me, I'm mostly going to set that aside for the purpose of this video. But I will link an interesting article about that down in the description, as well as some of the other sources that I used to write this video today. Let's get into the other two vectors for intergenerational trauma, what we might call nature and nurture. Of the two, I find the nurture aspect easier to understand. If our caregivers survived trauma, chances are that they developed some strength and resiliency, which we'll talk about later, but also probably a whole host of dubious coping techniques, erroneous self-beliefs, and irrational thought patterns. It's these bad coping mechanisms that cause problems, because even if we haven't experienced trauma ourselves, if our caregivers have, we've learned from them to interact with the world as if we have. And if we do experience our own trauma, and at some point most of us do, we're already primed with responses that just may make things worse. The second vector, those epigenetic changes, was only recently discovered, starting about a decade ago with studies of the offspring of Holocaust survivors. It turns out that children born after a parent has been through a particularly traumatic experience exhibit significantly different interactions with stress hormones than children born to parents who hadn't been through such experiences. Those differences have been linked to specific genes being effectively switched on or off. The full impacts of what that does aren't entirely clear yet, but we know that our processing of stress hormones affects everything from our levels of anxiety to our propensity towards heart disease. I don't have any Holocaust survivors in my family, but I know that at least some trauma was passed down to me from my parents. And delving into that with a therapist, I've been learning to look from an adult perspective at beliefs and instincts that were instilled in me as a child and that I've taken for granted ever since. I would love to tell you that these exercises resulted in a clarity and understanding that opened a window on my PTSD and cured it once and for all. But it is not that easy. What I can say is that knowing what I know now about the general impacts of intergenerational trauma and the specific behaviors and thought patterns I see in myself, it makes it that much easier to step away from those well-worn grooves and look at my brain as an observer. Isn't that interesting that I think like that? I wonder why that is. And as an observer, it becomes much easier to see different paths and to make different choices. I'm learning how to, in the immortal words of every Apple advertisement of the late 90s, think different. But there's another thing I've learned too. Remember how I said I was addicted to Family Search? I am really lucky in that I've had genealogy buffs on both sides of my family who have filled in a whole lot of our family tree. So I've been pretty easily able to trace my ancestors back to their arrival in the Americas, anywhere from the 1600s for some branches to the late 1800s for others. And some I've even tracked beyond that to their lives before in Slovakia, the Netherlands, Scotland, England, Germany, and Switzerland. This photo, which includes one set of my great something grandparents, helped really to bring them to life for me. I could just imagine the photographer telling them, and now a silly one, and so all of the women took the men's hats and put them on. Just the same way so many photographers have told my family the same thing as we stuck out our tongues and made a silly face. Even better, though, has been looking to the snippets of historical material attached to the genealogy charts. My 8th great-grandparents owned a Virginia plantation in the 1700s. And while I'm not proud of that fact, this description about it in the research has really stuck with me.
Sarah Ball was the first of many widows at Mount Ayr. Strong women who coped with wayward sons, civil war, and military occupation during both wartime and peacetime.
I am strengthened by the idea of generations of strong women in my ancestry. Women who managed to take over and thrive despite difficult times. And it occurred to me that we all, every one of us, come from a long line of survivors. Even if you don't have access to the sort of written history that I was able to find about my family, the very fact that we exist means that our ancestry goes all the way back to the start of the human race. We did not pop out of nowhere. We all have bonds to this earth and to every other person on it. We all belong. Maybe we all come from trauma, but we also all come from resilience. And that is knowledge worth holding on to. Until next time, I am wishing you love and joy and all of those good things, and I can't wait to talk to you again. If you like this video, I think you also might be interested in this one here about childhood emotional neglect. And if you haven't subscribed already, do that there. Getting to 1,000 subscribers is a goal of mine, and I would so appreciate your help.